My name's Shivam Malik. I'm a cybersecurity expert and student of history and politics. It's very easy to speculate that, yes, this virus could have been man-made, artificially released, but there are arguments on both sides, more so on the other side, because coronavirus does exist naturally. So the first thing to understand is, what is a virus?
Yeah.
That is the first question.
Tell us.
Viruses are sort of between living and non-living matter. All they are is either RNA or DNA, so genetic material encased inside a protein. That's all they are. They can't reproduce on their own. They do not produce their own food, etc. So they need a host to be able to reproduce. There are two ways that they reproduce. They enter a cell and then use cell's own genetic material and the food that the cells absorbed, etc., cell's own RNA and DNA to then procreate. And the cell dies after that. Mitosis, the process is called. And the other interesting point is 5 to 8% of human DNA is actually virus DNA. 5 to 8%. And we take in, on an average day, about 100 million viruses through the process of breathing every single day. Coronavirus does exist in nature, in its natural form. Bats, so I looked at the genetic makeup of the coronavirus itself, the COVID-19. So that, again, is a bit confusing. Coronavirus is actually quite a large group of viruses.
This is COVID-19.
COVID-19. And the reason it's called COVID-19, I'll come to in a second, is because it's actually mutated. So naturally, this virus in its particular strain, exists in bats. So what most scientists are hypothesizing at this stage, right, speculating, hypothesizing based on genetic information, is that the virus entered human intermediate creature. So that could have been a bat. So for example, MERS virus, that with the Middle East respiratory condition, that was another coronavirus. That entered the human beings through camels. SARS virus, again, entered animals through an intermediary as well. So now the speculation is it could be snakes or it could be pangolins, because pangolins were sold in China, in that particular market. And the people that got infected first, the first cases, were from those who were selling pangolins and snakes. So they're trying to now isolate this. So that's an important thing to understand. Now, insofar as creating viruses are concerned, so that's your other, Alberta, about 8 to 10 years ago, were able to create a virus, a horse smallpox virus, in a lab environment. So it has been done. Now, governments obviously have a lot more technology, a lot more money to be able to do this. However, what we've got to look at is, what are the implications of releasing this virus out in the world and to your normal citizens. Would China have done it deliberately? I do not think so. Could it have happened accidentally? Maybe. Based on, then there's another thing you've got to look at, you see. So this is one part of the research that I carried out over the past 10, 15 days. The other part was, what are the implications, economic implications? That's a very, very important factor we've got to remember. The world is already in a very unstable position economically. You've got the Brexit, the imminent banking crisis in India, the slowdown in India, and then a slowdown in China is going to drag the world down with it. So who benefits from this, right, is the question. So if there is a conspiracy theory about whether or not it was done deliberately, right, it was made in a lab somewhere and then released, then the economic implications...
Follow the money.
Follow the money, exactly. So if the world economy is going to get dragged down with this, it's in nobody's national interest to do it deliberately. No. It could be in some class interest, exactly. So that could have, because the medical companies, the pharmaceutical companies are going to benefit the most.
It's an economic multiplier.
It's
even on toilet paper. If you've got shares in toilet paper at the moment, your quid's in because you can't buy it anywhere.
Exactly. So then comes the other point, the vaccination. Now, I was reading somewhere recently that a few years ago, there was research being done in the US to produce vaccine for a type of coronavirus, for a particular type of coronavirus, but this research could have been modified because coronavirus is new. Human antibodies are not particularly are used to coronavirus. Hence, people are being infected. But at the same time, if you're young enough, fit enough, you do tend to recover because your body will produce the antibodies required to fight coronavirus. But if you're older, obviously, you know, there is a chance that you will suffer. And unfortunately, it's led to many, many deaths thus far. So there are interests. However, I'm of the opinion that unless proven wrong, the conspiracy theory that it was done deliberately, I would discount that completely. Accidental, maybe. So far, the genetic analysis that's been done by scientists comparing the COVID-19 to the one that occurs in bats, there's a 96.1% match in the genetic footprint. So it's very unlikely. However, that 4%, because like I said, the second way in which viruses actually multiply is they attach themselves to their host's genetic material, their DNA. So as the cell multiplies, the virus multiplies with the cells as well. So therefore, and then given the right conditions, the virus will kill the cell and then break out. Essentially, that's how you can even pass viruses through to your children. You can pass viruses to your children as well before they're born, essentially.
As one religious believer to another, why did God make viruses?
It's a very philosophical question, right? And
that's why I asked you.
In the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated that He will test you with poverty, He will test you with disease, and He will test you with destitution. So the way to look at it is a test from God. But at the same time, God has said that it's your efforts, it's your research, it's keeping up to date with what is out there that's important, because any disease that God Almighty has created in the world, He has also created a cure for it. So now it's up to us to search for the cure.
The US actually put people by force into quarantine for 14 days and then gave them a bill for thousands of dollars for the 14 days they were forced to spend in quarantine.
Let me give you a small example. You know, insulin, I'm a diabetic myself. So insulin, I don't take insulin, I take metformins, but insulin costs about $2 to produce in the US. $2. It's sold at $280 a shot. That's how crooked these pharmaceutical companies are, especially the ones based in the US. So they will want to benefit. They've already, again, one of the research papers I was reading, they've already asked Intel and Lenovo to help them process information much faster to be able to analyze if someone's suffering from coronavirus or not. And to me, the issue is that I would rather China came up with a vaccine quickly than somebody like
the US
or places like GlaxoSmithKline, because the cost to poorer countries would be, you know, their budgets could be wiped out. Yes, as long as I'm able to go away, you're able to go away, wash your hands for 20 seconds, right? Wash our hands properly, right? We should be fine. Ultimately, it boils down to common sense. The death rate is 2.5%, and if you break down that 2.5%, it's mostly people with existing conditions and people who are elderly, whose bodies are not, have gone through life, and now they're at a stage where they're unable to adapt. So you have to look at the figures in their right format. You know, like the famous saying, statistics, you can show whatever you want to show. In terms of viruses, so going back to the first point that I made, a lot of people say that if you live in a hot country, right, you'll be fine because the virus will die.
That's what Donald Trump thinks.
Well, the word that comes to mind, I wouldn't want to say in public.
Dr. Donald Trump. I wouldn't like to turn up
Viruses,
and find him at the GP desk.
the first thing is viruses are not alive to die in the first place. So some research I was reading a couple of years ago, one of the fears they have as part of climate change is there are a lot of viruses that are under ice at the moment. They're in an animated state. So once the ice melts, those viruses will be released and our bodies are not immune to those viruses. So viruses don't die because of hot weather. They do not die because of cold weather either, because they are not alive to die in the first place. So that's one thing. Yet the only permanent cure for coronaviruses is a vaccination, vaccine that has to be developed. That's one thing. Second thing is, if your body is still young, robust, you will recover. 0.5%, a few days ago, it was actually less than that. So ultimately, if you look at it objectively, right, so the recovery rate is quite high, but that's not dependent on hot weather, cold weather, damp weather, rainy weather. It's dependent on how your body copes, whether or not your body is able to produce those antibodies which are going to fight that virus. So that's the answer to the question.